Alright, this happened to me a few days ago, but it unnerved me so much that I haven't given it much thought until now, and I was immediately struck by the resemblance my encounter has with the Skinwalker stories I've read here on /x/. So I figured I may as well type this up and see what you guys have to say about it. First and foremost, I'd like to note that I'm an introverted 23-year-old living in Ohio who's bordering on becoming a shut-in, but I have this one friend from high school who, much to her credit, hasn't given up on me yet. She's dating this guy who got her into vintage cars, and she's going through this big rockabilly phase, which I don't personally care for, which is why I'd declined her previous invitations to attend local car shows. But this past Saturday I gave in. I'll call her E for anonymity's sake, and her boyfriend shall be J. Now, I was a little nervous getting a ride out there with them because I didn't want to get left behind for one reason or another, but I also didn't want to take my own car for fear of getting lost out in the rural parts of Ohio. It's easy to lose track of a specific vehicle in a crowd, and I'm terrible with directions, so I figured the best option was to climb in the back of Jay's old remodeled truck. We drove for what seemed like hours and, just as I'd suspected, we ended up in what was basically the middle of nowhere. The car show was being held on a large expanse of field that was only really accessible through a thin stretch of road that looked like it was more suited for tractors than old racing cars. As we pulled up and I took in the layout of this exhibition, I was none too impressed, but I couldn't tell you that. Plus, for better or worse, I was stuck there until they were ready to go, so I had to either make the best of it or be miserable for the whole day. Skipping to the meat of the story, I'll just say that I got bored of the seemingly endless rows of cars pretty fast, and as dusk approached I was hopeful that we would soon be leaving, but my hopes were thoroughly crushed when an impromptu bonfire was assembled. Feeling exhausted at this point and wishing that I hadn't come, I took a seat on a picnic table that was situated on this block of concrete a bit away from where all the vintage cars were parked. I was bored out of my mind as I listened to the men drunkenly talk about parts and tools, as if they hadn't done enough of that in the daylight, and by chance I happened to catch some guy staring at me through the crowd. I remember being a little unnerved by the intensity of his gaze, but I brushed it off thinking he was either going to cause trouble or he was high on shrooms. Either way, I diverted my attention elsewhere, and I sort of forgot about the guy as I thought about what I could have been doing at home on the computer in that moment. Minutes passed when I felt someone slide onto the bench beside me, and I offhandedly glanced over, expecting whoever it was to be oblivious to my presence, much like everyone else at this little shindig. But much to my surprise, the person was staring at me dead on. I jumped and reared back, more than ready to berate him for scaring the crap out of me when it clicked in my head. This was the guy who'd been staring at me from the other side of the crowd, and just like before, he was staring so hard at me that it freaked me right the fuck out. Being who I am though, I tried to play it off. I smiled and said something like, "Hey, how's it going?" He didn't respond, only continued to stare at me, and the longer I looked at him the more I realized that something was off. Despite how intensely his eyes were locked on me, the muscles in his face seemed slack. His jaw wasn't really sitting right in his mouth, and his arms were limply sprawled across his lap like he'd just let them fall, as they may when he sat down next to me and hadn't bothered to readjust them. I was really unnerved by this point, and just when I was about to excuse myself, he did something I don't think I'll ever be able to forget. Without anything else changing in his facial expression, his lips started to curl upwards. It was a slow process, and I could actually see the muscles tensing and straining in his cheeks as his lips gradually moved higher and higher until, I now realize with startling clarity, he was giving me the exact same smile I'd given him not too long ago. But it didn't stop there. They kept moving further up until I could see his gums, and his lips were stretched thin and white. It was only then that I smelled it, some horrible stench like a dead dog that had crawled up straight out of hell. I didn't even bother with pleasantries as I quickly stood up and moved away from him. At the time, I thought maybe he was just some whacked-out loser, but looking back on it, I see all kinds of similarities with what I've heard concerning skinwalkers. It's probably a really good thing that this thought didn't cross my mind at the time, because otherwise, I don't think I could have handled what happened next. So, I went looking for my friend and her boyfriend through the crowd, intent on telling them that we had to leave and I wasn't going to take no for an answer. I finally found her, and I tell her what happened. Of course she tries to say it was probably some guy who was just tripping out, and if I stay with her and Jay, I should be fine. I told her that wasn't going to work for me, and that I really needed to leave. I could tell that they were really disappointed, but much to my relief they gave in. They bid their farewells, though it was far from fast enough for me, and we walked across the dark field to his truck. We get in and start driving away. I actually thought I was home free in that moment, but as it turns out I seem to have really bad luck. Just as we go to pull out onto that thin road, something stumbles into the headlights. Sure, I was ready to start screaming my lungs off in the blink of an eye, but I calmed down when I saw it was a woman, until that is she lifted her head, looked straight through the windshield at me, and her lips started to slowly curl upwards. I was ready to have a panic attack at this point as I gripped the back of E's seat and I told Jay to just drive. Despite the panic that was no doubt in my voice, he didn't understand and said that he was just going to see if she was all right. He rolled down the window and stuck his head out, asking her if she was okay. Her head bobbed up and down sort of like a bobblehead's, but she didn't say anything. She was still smiling, and I watched in terror as Jay exchanged a look with E before leaning out the window again and asking her if she wanted a ride back into town, name omitted for anonymity's sake, and she nodded the same as before, almost like most of the tendons in her neck were cut or something. I'm sure you can imagine at this point the horror racing through my veins, though I didn't understand it at the time. And then double that as you think about watching this strange person slowly walk around to the driver's side passenger door, pull the creaky door open, and weakly climb in to sit next to you on the back seat. Yeah, I was ready to piss my pants. I'm actually surprised I didn't throw up from how scared I was. Well, we started driving again, and I pushed myself as far into the corner as I could without ever taking my eye off her, but much to my surprise she never even looked at me. She spent the entire ride looking down at her lap, and I was seriously starting to question how long we were going to keep her in the car with us, seeing as she hadn't specified where she needed to be dropped off at. But as we were passing a house on a back road right near the city limits, she suddenly spoke. Just one word. Here. But it wasn't the English language as we know it, it was more like a croak that sounded like the word here, and it turned my blood to pure ice. Jay was confused, but did pull over to let her out. Ever the gentleman, he asked if she was really okay being let out here, and she climbed out, turned to look at him in the driver's window, and nodded like a damn bobblehead again. Jay and E bid their farewells, and it was only for a split second, but I swear I saw her lips start to curl upwards again, and then she spun around and seamlessly disappeared into the darkness. The two lovebirds up front agreed that the situation seemed a bit strange, and I didn't even try to tell them the truth. Mainly because I don't know what the truth was. After I was dropped off at home, I turned on every light in the house before locking myself in my room, which is how I've been sleeping since then. The entire thing just really scared the crap out of me, and now that I'm seeing the Skinwalker connections, I'm even more unnerved by the memory. I haven't seen either of those people since that night, but I've only really left the house for work, because I'm still really paranoid about the whole thing. Was it drugs? A coincidence? I honestly don't think I want to know.
One night I was driving home from work right. It was late as fuck and super dark, and my mom stayed out in this 2-story house with her husband. I lived with them at the time. They were the only house for I would say a good 5 or 6 miles, nothing but forest all around. My stepdad was a contractor and construction guy, he built the house like 25 years ago. Anyway, I am driving along the windy ass, narrow ass road. I come around this corner and there is something crossing the street. Being the gentleman that I am, I slam on the brakes. It was small, I thought it was a rabbit. It slowly rolls across the street in front of me. It's colorful. I get out and look at it crawl in front of my headlight. It's a little toy train. It is rolling and making little toy noises. I walk up to it and pick it up, thinking maybe it was on an elevated section of road or the wind maybe. No. It's on a timer. You have to wind this toy up. While I am looking at it, the timer goes off. I wind it up fully and it chugs for about 20 seconds. Someone had wound it up right before I drove up on it. Thinking one of my friends is playing tricks on me, lived in a small town, immediately dismissed it as a joke. I went to the trunk of my car and got the tire iron out and the flashlight and started patrolling through the woods, yelling out names of friends. I keep looking for about 5 minutes when my car horn starts blaring. Laughing it off, I run back to the car and there is no one there. I said fuck it and went home. I got home and parked where I always parked, killed the engine and stared inside. I was about halfway to the door when my car horn starts blaring. I turn around and look at my car, which I had locked. I see no one inside. I realize someone had gotten into my car while I was out in the woods 10 minutes before. I go inside and call the police. They arrive 15 to 20 minutes later. The trunk to my car is open, no one inside.
Nothing as crazy as everyone else, but at least you know my story is real. Driving down a heavily wooded back road coming back from a climbing trip with a good friend. Just chatting and having a good time as usual. Windows fully down, music blasting. Cruising at 90 plus mph since no one around. All of a sudden friend turns down the music for no reason. Slows down and pulls off to the side of the road. Ask him what's up. Says, I thought I saw someone I knew back there. I ask him what the hell he means. He looks distant and doesn't really respond. Ask him again WTF is his deal. He turns to me and his face is pure white and says I feel strange. Has a massive seizure on the spot. No idea what to do, freaking the fuck out. Eventually passes and friend recovers enough that we can talk and he lets me drive him to the hospital. Ask him about it later and he says he doesn't remember seeing anyone, saying he saw anyone, or even stopping the car. If he didn't stop we would have died for sure, slamming into a tree at 90 plus mph. Wonder who or what he thought he saw to this day that made him stop. Another story that didn't happen to me, but happened to a friend, that this story reminded me of. Friend coming back from slacklining. Sitting in the passenger seat with him driving. They both see a badly crashed, flipped over car on the side of the road. Of course on a road that doesn't see much traffic because slacklining. There's a man standing next to the flipped over car. He looks beat up and bloody and he is hitchhiking. Friend doesn't want to pick him up, but M is driving and it's his car and he wants to help the guy out. They pull over and the guy gets in the back. Ask him some general questions, mainly if he's hurt and needs to go to the hospital. Adamantly denies that he's hurt and says he doesn't need the hospital. They lightly argue about it for a little before the man simply asks them to take him to 7-Eleven so he can get a new phone and make a phone call. Reluctantly agree. Say he doesn't talk much the rest of the ride. Drop him off at 7-Eleven. A few weeks later friend is chilling at home, police come knocking on his door. Show him a picture of the hitchhiker he picked up. Friend says that him and M picked the guy up and took him to 7-Eleven. Cops say the man is now on trial for killing his pregnant wife and he and M have to appear in court to give testimony. Apparently the guy killed his wife, got behind the wheel drunk, crashed his car, and then my friend and M picked him up. Literally picked up a hitchhiking murderer. Ironically said he was nice enough but quiet.